Good evening, and thank you for coming to our event, Climate Changes in the City, a proposal for participatory urban planning. This is an event produced and coordinated by Pixelache Helsinki. My name is Egleodo. I'm an Italian visual artist and producer based in Helsinki. I'm a member of Pixelache board, and this is Alan Wolfe, member of Pixelache. He's an Irish visual artist. What is Pixelache Helsinki? It's a non-profit association registered since 2002 as Picnic Frequency and has its headquarters in Suvilahti since 2014. Pixelache is interested in electronic art, subcultures, activism, design, and environmental issues. Its yearly program consists of seminars, workshops, exhibitions, performances, concerts, and live events. Pixelache Helsinki Festival is one of the oldest European emerging electronic and experimental art and culture festivals, happening every year in Helsinki since 2002. The association has been carrying its activities thanks to the support of Helsinki City Department of Culture and Leisure, Taike, the Arts Promotion Center Finland, AVEC, Nordic Culture Points, Svenska Kulturfonden, and other important public and private funds and sponsors. In 2017, Pixelache started a collective process under the name of Temporary Pavilion. How was the idea born? And what is the path that brings us here today? I give you a few elements on a timeline. In 2008, I organized an event in the occasion of Suvilahti 100th birthday, in collaboration with several organizations, which are Suvilahti permanent tenants, with Cooperative and the city of Helsinki. For 1 week, many artists came to offer their live program and artistic content in Tiivistamo, happy to celebrate the growing cultural community in Suvilahti. In that occasion, I published an article on the magazine Art and Design. My text was based on my interviews with Stuba Nikula, back then the director of Kapeli-Kiinteistö, architect Sari Schulman and Simo Frese, who were in charge to re-evaluate Suvilahti area from post-industrial zone to area for culture and leisure. In the article, I compared the destiny of Suvilahti with other similar areas in Europe. During the years, the cultural community in Suvilahti, Kalasatama have been growing and expanding, and many independent initiatives such as the spontaneously built skate park and other vernacular cultural productions started to appear more often. In this light, when I was asked to direct Pixelache Festival in 2017 with the coordination of Alan Wolfen, I suggested we would develop the concept around the philosophy of local and decentralized activities. Moreover, Pixelache Helsinki has a long tradition for initiatives of temporary place-making, such as recycling Olympic Games, reparathons, trash labs, where highly skilled members of Pixelache work together with local communities, recycling materials and teaching, learning how to modify the space for temporary pop-up uses. During the festival in 2017, we had a 3 days public assembly where members of different groups and independent professionals attended to talk about the significance and the possibility to co-design and build a temporary pavilion, a space free to use for everybody, free from consumption, and free from branding. We all agreed such space is needed. Among the participants of that assembly, architect Panu Lehtovuori and Kapeli-Kiinteistö Kai Vuotari, who had to be here but is busy in a meeting, he sent greetings, researcher Pekka Tuominen, who is here today, activist Ruby van der Becken, members of RIPES Europe, members of Commons Pistefi, members of Yhteismaa, members of Oransi, and other organizations and professionals interested in the topic or in a direct collaboration to make this project happen. During 2017 and 2018, we have continued our quest to study and to understand if such project could happen in collaboration with the city of Helsinki, and if, as a common benefit, we could devise this pavilion as an experimental interface for participatory urban planning. In order to grant success with the initiative, in 2017 already, Pixelache Helsinki hired architect and civil engineer Pedro Aibel to guide us in our endeavor. Similarly to Suvilahti, I must say, there are several areas in the city of Helsinki, such as Pasila or Lapinlahti, where local communities have formed and developed a very valuable cultural activity. We believe that our initiative could be a pilot enriching possibilities of dialogue between the central institutions and the citizens. This month, me and architect Pedro Ibeo published on Voima an article that synthesized this process. You have it at your disposal here today. Our discussion moderator today is, in fact, architect Pedro Ibeo. Pedro Ibeo is a design architect and civil engineer. He is at present a CONESAD Theo Research Fellow, a visiting associate professor at UNAM, University of Mexico, and at Wuhan University of Technology, China, and a lecturer and doctoral candidate at Aalto University on architectural democracy. He has realized more than 50 buildings in 20 different countries. He is the co-founder and CEO of the gamified co-housing O, founder and artistic director of Cidadania, Theatre and Games Group, a professional musician and Homebound, and the founder and chairman of the World Music School Helsinki, a drawing researcher at the Croquis Nights at Design Museum, and a comic novelist. Now I give the floor for Pedro Ibeo.
Thank you. So, everyone received this little thing here? Do you have this? Before we start, I would like to ask you to please fill in the first question. We want to see if these debates really matter. So, the first question is the city of Helsinki being overplanned? Yes, no, or maybe? Please answer it now. Then we'll have the whole debate, and then answer it again in the second part. Right? And then, at the very end, you return the form in that little box at the door. Okay, don't forget that. So this is the schedule of today. I'm going to introduce the topic and the motion. Then there will be opening remarks of the three speakers. There is one surprising one. Then there will be a discussion, a debate, where we also invite the public to give suggestions, not questions. Right? So I will ask if anyone has suggestions to what we are talking about. Then we'll open the floor to questions. Okay? Please respect the moderator, which is me. In China it works very well. In Europe it's a bit more tricky. People don't respect so much authority. So, first question, who built this room? Anyone knows? Hands up. Who knows? Who built it? Nobody. Who owns it? Anyone knows? One person knows? Suspicious. What about your home? Who knows? Who owns it? Who owns your home? Okay, it's more. And if you own 10 buildings, you think you have more power. Who agrees? 20%? 2 is enough? Who agrees? 2 is enough? Okay, 1.3%? If you have power, you think you influence the design of the city? Who agrees? Alright, it's like maybe 52.57%. And if yes, was that democratic? Who agrees? But how can you decide upon the city if you don't understand the city? Politics, I don't know if you know, politics comes from the word polis, which means cities, which means the matters of the cities. That's what the definition of politics is. So, I'll give you a short introduction how the planning of a building is, because this is what we're going to talk about, how we plan things. This is how it normally works in most of the countries that I work in. There are differences. So to build this little thing over there, a house, let's put it like this. There are some citizens, there are local ones, regional ones. This is not in scale, before the architects start to complain. There are the users, sometimes overlapping. And then there are the decision makers, sometimes called politicians, developers, the guys with the money, and the facilitators, architects like me or Pana. Citizens vote for the politicians, who are lobbied by the people who have the assets, and then they allocate resources to the facilitators. The facilitators make market analysis, what needs to be done, maximum that they can build with the minimum amount of resources to actually make the maximum amount of profit for the developers. right? I think everyone is aware of this, I hope so. But of course, we legislate over this. Otherwise, everyone will be building anything, everything, everywhere. So we have the urban planning department, or the zoning laws and regulations. These people are voted or elected by politicians. And sometimes, in most of the countries still, we consult the local population. Even if a building is agreed and follows all the rules, we still ask the neighbors, okay, are you okay with this? And if everyone is okay, voila, the building is built. So, a lot of things are done top-down, zoning laws and regulations, and sometimes bottom-up. The good news is, of course, these guys are the oversight, but they also are lacking the detail and corruptible. These ones, they have a lot of detail of things on local, but of course it's expensive and they lack the overall picture. And the most important here is this part, and it comes also to the title of today's event, about climate change, about our environment, where we're putting our resources. These are not under direct public scrutiny, meaning people not voting if it makes sense to build a new building, for example. And this is important because some studies say that the construction industry is responsible for 44% of the CO2 emissions worldwide, double the amount of the transportation industry. And over 10% of the buildings in Finland are empty. And it's even more in China, it's over 24%. Of course, these numbers can vary a lot depending on the study, so don't get all carried with that. And how do we evaluate if it's a good project, if it was a good thing that we did? It's difficult, right? Most of the times, as you know, architecture is evaluated by a great photo in a magazine, not so much about, well, is it good, it makes people happy, efficiency, or other levels that are more difficult to evaluate over time. And what about the decision process? How do we evaluate the democracy part, or the kind of governance part? Also subjective. Actually, there is no definition about on democracy anyway. So, one thing is clear. We are not going to be changing, this is not going to change. Our cities are going to be more complex, and we can just give up and say, all right, just leave it to the computers because this is too much data for us to handle. Or we can say, right, we have to find new ways to deal with this complexity, to deal with our limitations. And there's plenty of people trying these things, a lot. Of course, in my work, I'm doing this architectural democracy, which is also part of this process. I invite you all to go there and fill in the survey, which is part of the research. But we're bringing people together, right? So this is the goal, right? The kind of people we want to be is the kind of cities we should be designing, right? So if this is bringing, everyone agrees that stacking people on top of each other does not bring them together. What happens is they go into their own private space, meaning online, and they are easily trapped in their own circle of people who agree all the time with them. It's very easy nowadays to click away somebody who has a different opinion, right? We don't learn anymore to negotiate differences, to have to handle with annoying people who have different opinions about stuff. And this is not in China. That one was in China. This is Kalasatama, right? So is this the kind of city we want or not? What is it the profit driven? Is it bad or good? I'm not saying it. I'm not putting any. We need to think about what kind of cities we want to have. So, in this case, in Kalasatama, there was the Emerald Plan, which came out in 2007, and it's being implemented right now. And anyone knows about the Emerald Plan? I suppose you all know. So, there was the vision for Helsinki in 2050. So it meant to give a plan for the city, how it will develop. The city is growing, so how we deal with it. So there was a competition, several ideas were brought upon, and it was decided to go for the Emerald path, and it's now being implemented. And some of the spots you've seen before, maybe in Jätkäsaari by the harbor, and also in Kalasatama. And we're going to be talking more directly today on Kalasatama, especially in Suvilahti. This is the area here where you see it marked on the map. So the black buildings are the new buildings projected for the area, which are already being built. So this is how it looked like in the 19th century. This is a photo of a great photographer, and this is how it looks like now. The first skyscraper is already being built. It's been a space of a lot of bottom-up activities, festivals, and also the skate park. And of course, now is the critical decision-making part of the critical about all of this is, should we go for the over-planning, or should we keep it as a pocket of chaos? Right? So we discussed this on the latest article, which was published in Weimar, and we said there's a fight between the right and the left brain of the city. And I don't know if you know the latest research is about the right and the left brain, something to do about arts or sciences, that's romance. According to McGilchrist, researcher, the right brain focus on the overall oversight, as the left brain focus on the detail. That's why wouldn't we have one brain? Otherwise we would never adapt to change. It has to always have this dialectic communication between going a bit more to the right, a bit more to the left. And you see our society built upon that, actually, even political parties. Even in our own life. We sometimes tend to be more calm, more aggressive, and we try to find a middle point. The virtue is never an extreme, it's a middle one. So we decided to make this comparison and say, okay, maybe if we planned everything in Suvilahti, that's the right brain approach. So this is how likely it's happening, that is being totally planned, and then the city will propose, and as it is already doing, some competitions where the local population can propose some art stuff or some local events. Or we do the other way and say, let's leave that area open to change, local, a bit of chaos, and let the rules brought upon, and then sooner or later there will be decisions that have to be done, and it will be more organic, but will take more time. Okay? So for this debate, for this discussion, again, showing this scheme how things work, we invited one decision maker, which is Anni Sinnemäki. She's the Deputy Mayor of Helsinki Urban Environment, a professional politician, maybe representing the right brain. The right, not the right like the right, but the right. Right? English can be. So, as a facilitator, we invited Pan Lefkovoy, architect and professor, co-founder of Livadu Architects, but also writing a lot about public spaces, so he's a researcher. And so a person more focused on the detail, on how to build stuff, more left brain. Not political, maybe, I don't know. Just on that, what I said. Right? And we also have now an extra speaker today, Anna Helander, the president of SAFA, and chief specialist of City of Helsinki, which is somewhere in between, the right and the left side. And we have you, which we hope is going to be the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is this little thing that connects the right and the left brain. Why we have that, it's unbelievable, right? Communication. Why we communicate with the left and the right brain, why they're not together, make some things so much easier, right? So we hope then you find balance with us. All right, so let's start now. We didn't decide yet who's going to start first. We can vote. Shall we start? No, shall we start, Panu? We have already a presentation. Okay, thank you. Now Panu left the word.
you, Pedro. Great analysis. I'm not sure about left and right. I mean, yeah, I think I'm definitely a dialectic person. In some confusion about that complexity. But I just prepared really on short notice last second some picks of some ideas that might feed our discussion about planning, how we should understand planning, how is it changing, and also a few ideas regarding let's call it tools for self-organization. As Pedro mentioned, my research long time has been about public space, new forms of public space, and I've been focused quite much on temporary uses, exactly on this unplanned, what can happen in unplanned spaces, spaces that are not yet decided, spaces in waiting. That's a long tradition since Urban Catalyst project, can you believe, 1998, that's what started, so it's really Middle Ages. Anyway, just very shortly, some ideas that I hope feed our discussion. I jump out some slides, not to waste time. Okay, urban society. I think we are having a moment of quite historic shift, and we should think how our actions as humans, as human society, as urban society is evolving. Questions for planning. And then there, okay, we know that Pedro had much better analysis of that, but I think it's quite interesting that if you have historic view, there are some, I would say, key changes or key innovations of planning that happened at the economic crisis or recessions, and now, of course, since 2007, we are still in the middle of the financial crisis. I think it's a question mark. Are we now in a moment of finding new approach to planning? I think the topic of today is very good, and I think exactly together the urban community should think of that. What we are living with still is modern urban planning and zoning, yes, the complex decision making, yes, but I think it's useful to understand that about 100 years ago, planning as a quite central tool to manage industrial society that was new at that time. People were living in the middle of what the hell is happening? Every place is full of factories, smoke, and what's happening, and so forth. And then some, I would say, quite clever people, some thinkers came to the scene and found an idea. Well, we can actually organize this mess, this emerging novelty into the society through controlling space. And that's the roots of modern planning. Basically, the practice we are still living with, having in Helsinki, dealing with that. An idea that there was a global view to space, socially produced space, and an idea that those new key functions of the new society, material production, cars, telephones, everything, public consumption, there was suddenly wealth. Earlier societies were poor, now there was wealth. And there was a new function in society, a public consumption of that wealth for something to decide together. Thirdly, dealing with reproduction of labor, babies, leisure, keeping people healthy and fit. And those three functions were then understood spatially. And there's an idea that they are zoned in different locations in the city to make the whole system efficient and to control some of the negative externalities of that emerged industrial city, especially pollution and other. Then we had industrial zones, housing areas, parks, and areas for leisure, as the three key spatial elements of modern city. And then, because we separate people from each other, these functions we need more traffic. So transport became the fourth key function. And this is the basic situation with which we are still living. In some way, and still today, is quite much based on that. It was also anti-urban in some sense. Planners at the time, they were not interested in the city in the sense of density, public space, community. They were interested in this project to control industrial society, make it function more efficiently. So that's in the one root of what we are talking today. Now we are, since 100 years, in a moment of change. Urbanization, we all know, big issue, but it's good to understand it's both quantitative and qualitative process. It's a process of bigger cities, more people living in cities, less in countryside, but especially it's a process of accumulating novelties, innovation, new ways to organize our life, social innovation, all kind of stuff, which is increasingly coming from dense and large urban agglomerations. Okay, I can jump this. There's a question: do cities still matter, or are we talking about some kind of international connectivity only of cyber war, oil, etc.? I will skip that. The interesting debate from Henri Lefebvre in 1970 in the book Urban Society, asking, actually, can we really understand what's happening if we are going through a systemic change, a radical change of society from industrial to something new? Can we actually understand what's happening? It is the same question Stephen Hawking, this cosmologist, is making about singularity. Can we see through singularity? Lefebvre had that same question in social sciences. Can we see through the singularity of society going to something else that he started to call the urban society? And that's a word I personally like. He was saying that there's a critical phase and there's a blind field, we don't see through. Now, it's 50 years since Lefebvre, and we should be able to see through the blind field. I think what we are discussing now, building together today, there are solutions for this question. What actually is happening, how we could live, how we could organize our own life for the better in the new situation. And it's quite interesting, and it's not so well known in academic literature, that for Lefebvre, if you read carefully, this big kind of filled with the text of him, quite sharp in some other sense. Habiting, asuminen, living in a place, living concretely, making decisions, self-organizing. That was actually the key term for Lefebvre to actually understand how this new society is made. And I think we are at the core of our debate today. Okay, I jumped this, how as architects and planners we understand, we know this, something very interesting is happening in Helsinki, there is new culture, all that. There is also big risk of big corporations taking over, so we are definitely having a dialectic situation of local and global, of sharing and commons, and maybe even more money with this platform economy. And that's of course the real, we all are to an extent aware of artificial intelligence, big companies using what we do every click to build their systems, using that wrongly for wars and da. So there is clearly a new dynamic which for Lefebvre could not see. So this is a novelty, and I think it's definitely big and even I think globally question. I said how we organize our life in our society for the better for humans. Okay, this economic point. There might be a possibility to argue that urban society has also a new economic from agriculture, mining to this manufacturing, making T4s and cheap phones to everybody. Then services, making money with space and real estate and so forth. Those are the known three levels of economic added value. But there might be a possibility to argue for urban layer for economic adding value, which needs actually different ways to come. So this is also a very, very big question in research. How should we understand that? Okay, so that's my theory. How much time I have? 1 minute? Yes. 1 minute. So to put our debate in historic context, industrial modernity and modern urban planning, and let's say hypothesis of systemic change to urban society from industrial. And what do we mean by planning and urbanism in that? A question to take deeper. Just one note, is Herman Mietisch here? No. Just yesterday, my student in Tampere, Herman Mietisch, defended the thesis. This structure for civil self-governance. So now I jump directly from the big to the small. And thanks for, maybe there is a detail. Maybe that's my own detail. Anyway, Herman in Dublin made quite good thesis, basically conceptualizing and also then programming, piloting in context, a new kind of application, let's call it like that would help anybody to get something done. That's actually the aim. And he went through quite much theories, but I think this is quite good. So you see the source there, 4 forms of behavior in self-organizing situations or systems. You need to decode, you need to kind of empty your head, you might say. You need to move away that to get somebody to work with, to expand, to make your thing bigger. You need to contract, make sense of it, make it workable, and then you need to actually do coding. So it's decoding, expansion, contraction, coding. It's some kind of sequence of self-organized process, which comes from theory, and then maybe not accidentally, it looks very much like theories on crowd sourcing and co-creation. Very similar elements can be found in those processes. And basically, you can Google that Herman structure. This whole thesis, it's 150 pages, quite detailed. There is the whole documentation of that application. It's a working application, and I wish that we could maybe combine forces and get something done with that. It's quite nice, not only a try, it's quite nice pilot to help us to get something done, as I said, together. I don't go to this kind of funky mockups, but I think that's useful. And then I just finish by saying that in Finland we are in a situation that we try to move away from this type of planning where we are today. There is a quite big process for renewal of planning law and a lot of experimentation at the moment. I think many actors are quite open to rethink, and even the big players, ministry and big cities, are quite open to rethink at the moment. Of course, that takes a long time. How to plan for urban society, weak actors, novel qualities, and especially complexity. I really like that you brought that in. I think there is interesting debate, which might be condensed by saying that complex systems require simple rules. Thanks.
So now we have Annie Sinimaki. Please, go forward.
Thank you, and good Thursday evening to everyone. I don't have a presentation, so I will be more like giving remarks. I think my life has been so harsh lately that giving remarks comes easier than having slides. I think I will start with a certain kind of circle that fits well with the theme of this evening. I was really properly introduced. I have been a full-time, one could say a professional decision maker soon 20 years. I was elected as an MP in March 1999, so in next year's March there will be apt 20 years, and for 4 years now I have been working and doing stuff in the city of Helsinki in 2 big different roles, but basically dealing with the urban environment, with planning issues, real estate issues. But what I wanted to say is that with Panu, actually, I think that the circles or the circumstances where we have the first met has been really already a long time ago, in the late 80s or really early 90s, when I was part or around doing stuff around an organization called Oranssi that started with squatting spaces in Helsinki and different spaces, buildings for people to live in actually, and also, for example, the nowadays theatre school that is in Finnish called Kookostehdas, the coconut factory that was squatted as well, and it made its own impact that the building was preserved, because at that time there was a plan to tear it down and build new buildings instead of it. And Panu was then part of a bunch of architects who did stuff for Oranssi in order to challenge certain plans or certain ways buildings or areas were being seen, how to see them differently, how to see renovation of old buildings differently than perhaps would have been the original or the more official thought. So I think that this full circle with Panu is good to mention here. Then my remarks on planning processes, something perhaps on the theme that who has power in planning processes, or who is able to influence the planning processes. Then I thought that I would say something of the question, will the city be overplanned? And then some final remarks after that as well. The legislation that guides the planning processes in Finland, the basic structure of that legislation is already a bit more than 20 years old. At that time in the 90s, when that legislation was introduced, one could say that that legislation was modern in the sense that it had the participatory element and the elements of discussing with people, people influencing the planning process, that it was quite well taken care of, or it was taken in the way that actually even today is not part of some other fields of legislation, that people's right to participate and the obligation that the legislation puts to officials to take people in, that is stronger in land use and in city planning than it is in many other processes, even still today. And with that, I don't want to say that it's perfect or that it gives enormous, great, super influence to people, but just to give a comparison that I think it's fair to say. And especially perhaps if you think of 1990s, the obligation of hearings and participation was at that time fairly strong. I would also say that I think if I think of Helsinki city planning and how it's done and how the work is done, one could say that probably still the most defining actors are the city planners and the architects. Because I think that their power, it comes from the expertise, and it also comes from the fact that whoever presents the first draft or the first map quite often is the most influential one, because in a way that person or that organization that sets the frame for the discussion in a way guides the process till the end. Although you can change it sometimes even quite much with the process, but in a way still the one that frames the discussion or gives the initial map or initial bone structures to some vision is really influential. Then I could say that the process in a way leads or guides things quite much to the direction that people's participation is quite local and in a way fragmented, and perhaps it pushes people to say no to some plans that take place near where they live. This is an exaggeration. People participate in other ways as well, but one could still say that the most normal process is that there would be a neighborhood, a part of the city, then there is a plan to do infill construction, something to be added up to that area, then people from that area gather, they feel that this will change perhaps our area too much, and then they list the things they do not want to have. Also, one could say that our process is such, doesn't differ perhaps some other questions, but if you are in an area where you have a lot of lawyers and architects living, doesn't matter if perhaps it's also a plus if you have a couple of people who work as consultants. And so those people, they know how to write during the process so that they can either get their will through, or if they do not get their will through, they know the best how to write a complaint to the administrative court, and they know the legislation so that they can perhaps then reach a result that the administrative court says that, okay, this zoning bylaw was not according to all the legislation, so you must do it again. This is perhaps like this does happen. It's not a caricature in that sense, but of course it's not everything. And I would say that past years or lately, and it certainly has been one of my views that I have wanted to be taken more as a style of working for the city planning, has been that we should always start the planning without a proposal or without a map. But that planning should start with discussions that what are the aims, what do we really want, what the city sees that we should, what is the city's analysis, what do we need, what would be beneficial, and then to listen to the players, be it citizens or be it groups of citizens or be it private companies or other interest groups, that it should start with a discussion that what are there common aims or common denominators to start the planning process with. I think that, like Panu mentioned, that there are plans to renew, even quite radically, the whole legislation of the land use and building issues. I see that there are great possibilities in that renewal. I see also that there are certain risks, because there are certainly interest groups that want to see more liberal or much freer process, since our nowadays process, in a way, the rules that guide the processes are fairly rigid, that you should have first the initial ideas, and then you have the draft proposal of the zoning bylaw, and then you have the final proposal of the zoning bylaw. And in all these phases, you have right to cities obliged to go to the areas, go to the people, listen to them. Everyone is entitled to give their written opinions, to give even informally, and everything that citizens have said, you are obliged to answer that. And even when it goes to the building permits, there is the process of, you can say, that, oh, I don't want this, and that must be also taken into consideration in the minimum form that you should at least answer the questions or the complaints. And I think that certain, perhaps circles see that liberalizing this process, where you also have very many requirements for the formal or for the substantial substance of the zoning bylaw. So you have to analyze the would there be too much noise, or you have to analyze would this area to take all the rainwater in. There's a lot of things you have to know before you actually pass a zoning bylaw. And liberalizing this might, in positive sense, lead to a process that would be more collaborative, more creative, less rigid, less producing places that are similar or perhaps overplanned. And perhaps the risk would be that more liberal process would give more power to those who own land, own buildings, or have economic assets, all in all, more. And I think that this is one of the things that we should be debating and weighing when discussing the new legislation, probably in the coming general election, and then in the process after it. And also, I would say that one other way of thinking of it is that although there is a lot of discussion of over normativeness of the process, then there are certainly things that the legislation does not over, what would be the word, over norm, over requirements, because for example, emission reductions, climate change, it's not written into the process that you should use materials whose climate impact you know and you can measure and to minimize them. Many cities do that. Helsinki has ambitious climate targets, but it's not written in the law that these are the issues that you should take into consideration. I would also say that regarding the planning process, what characterizes things in Helsinki is that we are a really substantial landowner in the city. And in the planning, whatever the legislation, whatever the process, the landowner still has a lot to say. And in Helsinki, I think that it has influenced, in certain way, the processes to be more democratic, the democratic bodies being more able to put goals and targets to the planning than in the cities that include most of the world's cities that do own less of their land than Helsinki. We have been able to implement the city council's guidelines regarding mixing social housing, city-owned, regulated rental social housing, and free market housing in the same areas. Jätkäsaarien Kalasatama or Kruunuvuorenranta are really clearly being built so that in the same area you have the Helsingin kaupungin vuokra-asunnot buildings, and then you have buildings where you sell 10,000 euros per square meter flats. and these buildings are really near each other, and of course the aim of the city council has been that, okay, we build this area, there's one great school, and kids from all different backgrounds go to that same school. And that has worked out in Helsinki quite well, and it has certainly helped us that we own the land, because then we have been able to push the rules that has been decided upon democratically. One could also see that this having quite clear political goals, being a landowner, it has also then influenced that planning processes have in Helsinki traditionally been quite planned, that the city planning department has had power, and we have had perhaps less processes and less experience from such cases where the process is more free and from sort of bottom-up driven. And with bottom-up, I include everything from sort of citizens' initiatives to also private sector type of bottom-up led processes. And certainly I think that that is something that is in many ways in sort of in transformation process in Helsinki, partly because the sort of economic factors we have wanted to take more into the planning process, that it would be not that it would, planning process should understand the economic drivers and economic logic, and also certainly it has been an aim to give more power to people's own initiatives and abilities to define how to build the city. Then I think yes, that about the process and a bit about where it seems to be going. Regarding overplanning, that is a question that I love the question of overplanning, and it has always been one of the sort of personally most important ones to me in the city planning. I think partly because I have always myself really like been drawn into undefined space. And perhaps it serves me right that I have then been like years working in an organization that does plan and change undefined space into defined space. With what do I console myself with? Certainly with the fact that I do believe that the undefined space also finds its way. That the question is not so much that we are. I do believe that we are not simply capable of planning and building everything according to the plan. And it might be that we plan Kalasadama and build it how it will build it how it was planned. But then the undefined space will find its way somewhere else. So I think that in a way, since it's like a staggering fact that the city will never be ready, it will never be complete. And I think it's one of the best things in working with the city or building the city, that in a way you can relax yourself, because it's for sure that you will never complete a task. And I think partly it's joy of this job to see things done, and to see ideas and dreams to come concrete and wood. But still, in a way, I do have a firm belief that the undefined space will then find its way. And in a way, I bit sort of hesitate that even, I understand I've been part of demonstrations and movements and debates when the undefined space combats the defined space and the planning and the decision making. But at certain point, I think that even with that fight, you can end up with too much definition. And so in a way, I think that perhaps at that point when the demand for this particular and undefined free space comes too defined in itself, it's probably better to move somewhere else, or it can be not you, but the other generation or other people. And it was something that I thought of quite much with the question of the warehouse, the railway warehouses in the area where the new central library is being built at the moment. That was a super important fight for me, and the area had been really something for me, and I remember the time when there were the gardens and I walked there and I knew that this area is probably, I like it more than later when it's all done. And but when the votes and the decision-making battles regarding those railway warehouses was lost, so in a way I thought there that this particular case was lost, but actually what was not lost but more like won was the idea that we need that kind of space in Helsinki, and that that kind of functions and those kind of people are able and will be able to move somewhere else. I don't know, it's an endless question, and I don't know if my thinking is in a way too positive in this regard, but I would say that it comes from experience for decades that I have seen that usually the undefined masses and the free movements have an ability to go forward and find new things. Then I would conclude or end with saying a few words about the general plan of Helsinki that Panu had a map of. The general plan was decided in the council in 2016. It has been in many ways, from its philosophy and the way it's presented and the way it was debated, in many ways it was a new kind of general plan or new kind of master plan. It was what was interesting, I thought, while it was debated and while it was in the public debate, was that it was more, I think, a debate of what kind of city we really want as such than other master plan debates or general plan debates earlier. Because that plan, I think that it succeeded in conveying a certain strategic idea of a city more than showing what are the plots or areas, where are the boundaries of areas where we will build the most in the coming next 10-15 years. Of course, part of the debate and much of the criticism regarding that master plan was directed to certain areas and their boundaries where we should build. But still, I think that there was more discussion that what is Helsinki, what are its strengths, how we do see the city, what should be the whole traffic system of the city, what is the logic of the how the city works. And that debate was, it went more to the essence of the questions than many debates earlier. And then perhaps one thing that then we partly lost in the highest administrative court as a city, one thing that was dear to me in that master plan was the aim to rethink the space being devoted to motorized traffic in a new way, differently. And like the modernist tradition that, okay, people live over there, and then here's the city center where people work, and then you have motorway type of highways coming near to the city center, and to rethink that actually those motorways should not anymore be motorways, but they should change into city space, into places where people do live and do work and do other stuff as well. And in the highest administrative court, since which was in a way natural part of this evolutionary debate, it was the state traffic department and the traffic department of the state's local authorities that did a complaint on that, because they think that the motorways are theirs to handle, and we lost part of them in the court ruling. But I think that it's not a permanent loss in the sense that these ideas will anyway go further, and at some point I think that there will be an agreement that motorway is not a thing to be inside the city. And then last remark on that, general plan comes also to the planning aims of planning or aims of building the city. I do have a firm belief that a good city builds a lot, because I do believe that if you do not let flats to be built in the city, it's quite likely that since the flats then are more of a scarcity, it's a resource that there are not enough of it. And usually if there's something that you don't have enough of it, those people who will get the thing that is wanted but you don't have enough of it are more rich and more influential. And if you want to be equal, I do believe you should build a lot, because then people who have less money, people who come from abroad, people who come from other parts of Finland, people who grow up in economically not so well-off families in the city of Helsinki itself, those people have better possibilities, better likelihood to find a place for themselves in the city if the city allows planning to happen, or whatever there is a process behind a flat to be built. And well, this is something that I do debate quite a lot with a lot of people, sometimes people who say that I'm green, why do you want the city to be so full of people, or why do you want to build so much? Because usually, of course, when you build, you don't always lose green space. Actually, there are great examples that you do not lose at all green space. Sometimes you still lose some of it. But also people like their surroundings, the built surroundings as they are. So there is a lot of like hesitance, why should we build? And I quite often debate with my mother, well, she's not green, I would say, as a sort of party person, probably like an angry left-wing social democrat if she would have an official party. It's not that, but like mindset, I would say. And she says that you're not wise that you're pushing infill building so much, because then people who live in the city, they don't like it, and they just like think that you are on sort of too forceful in the policies. But then, like I say to my mother, that I don't have endless years in this position, that I should better use it for something that I do believe in, than thinking whether it's so popular or not. And I think that is a question that is not. There are really different approaches or understandings of that, but just why I thought that the general plan that really enables to build quite a lot, that gives background to really densify the city and to allows the cities to change quite much. I do believe that it's a key to equal society or equal city. Thank you.
So now we have the last presentation, Hannah Handler, the president of the Finnish Association of Architects.
Thank you. I have about 2 remarks. I'm thinking Helsinki is coming a little bit dull city, isn't it? And I don't need the weather. They are like, the Helsinki is very new city as well. So we don't really have very many old buildings here. This is not old industrial city. This is administration city. And when it was like early 19th, we had hardly like 500,000 people here. So it's very young city. So now we have like new time. We have old buildings and we should take care of that. But we have this, we just know how to build new ones. And also this city planning thing in Helsinki, it has always based on expansion of city. It's very normal. It's nothing special, really. And now we are growing inside. This is like the new strategy of Helsinki. So now we are filling those empty spaces, and we can't do it in the same manners than we have done this expansion thing, where we had like virgin land, which was city-owned, and then we built streets and we made overall plans. Now we have to deal with the inhabitants, we have to deal with the firms and all kind of new kind of situations to find something new and to benefit also the culture of those places. I also think that when it's question of old buildings, we have like Lapinlahti, we have Suvilahti. They are nowadays all owned by the city of Helsinki. It's very much also a question of ownership. Who owns and how we deal with that. Nowadays, about 3/4 of this budget for buildings goes to repairing those old buildings. When it was like 2000, it was like almost nothing, or let's say maybe 10%. So this change has been enormous, and still we don't know how to do it, really. We know how to this is so difficult in English, how to fix those buildings so that they would be like new buildings, but how to fix them so that it's enough, and so that we can have a interesting culture there. I think we have a lot to learn. And also, the change in our society has been very, very huge. Finland used to be uniform culture, and we are very good at making things average. We are very good at it. So we don't have really something special, or neither we have really bad buildings and bad suburban areas. We have average for everybody. This is middle class society. But now we have understood that it's we are different. And I don't mean that we have a lot of people also abroad. But we Finns, original Finns, we also have a different kind of needs, and we could get something out of it as well. So I think this kind of panel and discussion, I can see a lot of people also from other kind of cultures could be quite interesting. I have two small examples, anyway, if I have time. Yeah. One is Christiania in Copenhagen. This place is free city. It's so funny. When I was working for the building commissions for City of Helsinki, this Christiania was one example. Because we also have, according to our new city strategy, Helsinki is city of contrast. I don't know what does it mean, but so it's said. So we want also this kind of vivid inhabitants culture here. But this Christiania, it's pre-city, but they have that big book of regulations there. So if those regulations don't come outside, they come from inside. People always need some kind of structure anyway. I think it's interesting. It doesn't mean that it's bad or good. It's interesting. The other, I think, interesting story was from Holland. They made this law 2006, I think, that if the building has been empty for over 1 year, then you can go in and you can squat. Thanks. And you just call police and they take your name down, and then you can be there. And therefore, those owners of those empty buildings, they thought that it's better that they choose who come to their buildings, not to just let anybody come. So it caused a lot of very interesting culture there, and even this kind of business they could make, and they had that law for 10 years about, not anymore. But I think that's also something we should think, because now we do things like we have, like our old buildings would be new ones, and also we don't have I think good processes for the how to develop places where we always have something. Thank you.
please, if you have suggestions, when we're talking, we're going to ask some questions to the panel, and they will give their own ideas or suggestions. If you also have, raise your arm, and you will be given a microphone, and when the opportunity comes, I will ask for your suggestion, not question, hopefully. And please be brief about it, not a presentation, just a short one. Okay, thank you for the presentation. Some microphone. So I would, I don't know if everyone got this little pamphlet here, but we put to the right or left brain kind of thing. You got it? So we were putting some on one side the emerald plan, some parts that were written down, like a vision for 2050. On the other side, some ideas that we asked a prominent urban planner architect from New York, Arthur Sorkin, and we asked him what alternatives could we do to, for example, Sugilati. And he gave some examples like why not propose new building categories or new zoning categories. For example, anything goes, pockets of outlaw places throughout the city. The law could stipulate that these places be no drain or service, for example, be self-sufficient, a bit like Christiana, as you were saying. So I would like to ask the panel to briefly comment, how far would we be to be innovative in that sense? Helsinki always fights against Oslo and Stockholm, right? Innovative, and I hope it sticks in that. How far could we reach to say, why not a new zoning plan or a new building zone? Please, you got a microphone?
I'm now doing a new architecture policy for Helsinki, and we have been thinking to have about 10 such places where could be like open for this kind of things, where the only thing which is like categorized prohibited is to live there. Because living, there are so many regulations, so many laws to
I continue, yeah. With this question, we have been discussing with Henna when she has been preparing the document of architectural policy, and I think it's something we should definitely go for. I also think that we could have that this sort of anything goes, or perhaps the Finnish version would be sort of many things go, or sort of nearly anything goes type of thing, that I think we could have big different categories, that we could also have certain areas where people are living, and that we would then allow the construction or the planning to happen more freely than all in all in the city. So there could be like a couple of different categories for these kinds, kind of examples of having an area where you would have somewhat at least different norms or lesser norms than usually. And then of course it might be like mirrored in areas that we should have in any case when we start implementing the minus 80% emission reductions from the 1990 level till 2035. So we should, in all new areas or in the old areas anyway, implement experiments and things where we do produce less CO2 than we have been used to in areas where we build.
Yes, thanks. in some sense, these questions seem to expect that there still is planning. There is some kind of city, Helsinki, and it's planning, and then we can have these different kind of new ideas. But and yeah, that's fine. But maybe then first question to me would be that in this changing, emerging society, actually, for what we need something we can call planning. And before going to innovation in zoning, I would like to ask that. And we discussed that quite much in different contexts now in recent couple of years. One idea that is I think quite good, and I can explain to our debate today, is that we do need planning for public intervention. Somebody who comes from democracy, politics, and public agency to preserve diversity, to preserve things that are different from what's next to it, or that are unique in the city, that are somehow special. And this is maybe value in itself, but especially it's important because diversity in different scales and in different ways is very important for renewal. Even renewal in the sense of these different climate and resource questions, maybe more clearly in the sense of cultural attractivity, cultural renewal. There is an economic logic to that. But basically, preserving diversity, that would be one important aim. Okay, how you can plan for that? It's not easy, but protecting something that is unique is of course one. Making space for those unique things that exist, which needs some kind of social mapping. You need to understand the city, and then you do some kind of protection. It's very similar. We discussed quite much that this unique, maybe people based locally creating locations. They're very similar to actually urban parks 100 years ago. It was not self-evident in just a city that the city needs parks. Now we are so used to the idea that nobody would ask, why do we need a park? But it was the same kind of debate. And then parks were deemed to be important for public good because of all those things we know now. A little bit similarly, we should recognize these unique locations, unique cultural sites as a amenity that is very important, very central for the whole city. And that's maybe one point. Mapping, understanding that as an amenity, finding tools to protect, to develop those places, linked to the idea that Anni said that these underdefined spaces always find their way. There is always new space. That is to an extent true, but of course these actors who are in some sense doing something, they are not some kind of superman. They need maybe some, at least they need to know where's the next place. So there is some kind of policy, maybe an architectural policy actually, that is leading to that. So this kind of uniqueness and protection is, I think, one dimension. And then I think in the sense of accepting more clearly the real estate process and planning, I think the city really could plan for experimentation. I think one policy might be that in every new area, okay, there is social mix, there is climate targets, but there's always one big block which is completely experimental. And then that means other policies, okay, what then is meant by that? But just in the planning phase, let's make space for experimentation. It's not meet the concept of building another skyscraper, but there's experimentation. Could be more, but two ideas.
Okay, just and then following up on that, before I go to a comment on public.
But it's wise. Said the wise things.
So no,
I commented.
No, comments from the audience. But talking about these experimental pockets, I mean, I'm sure you are aware of the theorists like Richard Sennett of planning the unplanned, open systems, open the city for experimentation, as you said. But in real practical terms, for example, what's happening in Subilaht, it seems to contradict that. Because there's an experimental place which has been ongoing since the Industrial Revolution, but now it seems to be going overrun by an overplanning around Palasatama. Am I wrong with this, or is this should Suvilahti not be left alone as an experimental place?
I think that, well, we are in the end, well, at least we are in a sort of situation where that has been debated, and the question is more or less open to different possible answers. Well, anyway, in the end, no plan has suggested that there would be no Suvilahti. So the remarkable industrial buildings are protected, and they will, well, and it's a it's really difficult job actually to understand that how you can even make something of them, because they have been really in industrial use. And then it's for sure that we will have a space around them where you can do different stuff. But then the debate has been that how large that area should be, what should be its boundaries, what should be the economical logic of the area, that should there be, how much the city should take economical responsibility of it being not built partly. I think personally also what makes the situation different or opens new possibilities is that the whole Hanasaari power plant will stop its being a power plant by the end of 2024, and I think that that is something that definitely will give again more space to different functions, because the building is fine. I don't think we should in any way to be able to tear it down. So there's a huge space where it's not so easy to actually come up with what you can do with it. So I think that the space can be flexible for really quite many directions. Well, then at the moment we have received different proposals what to do with it and what kind of buildings and investments would be suitable for making the area at the same time somehow economically feasible, but also functions that would prevent those or exclude those original plans that have been like building office space to the boundaries or to the area that is now part of Suvilahti. So that would be like not a radical alternative, but like an alternative to those original plans. Regarding my own opinion, I think I'm not like, I have not yet, I have no final opinion yet.
Anyone else wants to comment?
About Suvilahti? No. But I think if we really want something interesting, cultural things, those things have to happen in such a temporary places where the structure is in chains. Because then when time goes, then it's like evolution. Then it needs always some kind of organization to run it, and it's not anymore so free as it's in the beginning. So, did I?
But wouldn't it make Suvilahti the perfect case?
Yeah, I think we need in all over the city, like places like Suvilahti and Kaapelitehdas, we need those also in suburban areas, and different kind. Every place needs like their own character. So yeah, and there has to be places for free kind of things and open spaces and so on. And they need to be also big enough that, you know.
Yeah, many thoughts come from that. As Anni mentioned, the fight over this railway warehouses, I think the war was 2003, and then somebody burned them in 2007, I think. Anyway, that left this kind of political sign in Helsinki, and then Suvilak, this kind of child that very many were in agreement that okay, Helsinki needs some kind of free space, and then Suvilak was then available. And you should read Maros Krivi, quite interesting researcher. He made interesting articles about Suvilak these early years, but basically the policy of Helsinki, I can't remember if Tuvanikula was very low in that. Was, okay, anything can happen in Suvilak. It was in some sense kind of anything goes. It's in the sense that basically free to any idea, any actor, and so on. But Maros critique is that was happening in a more general cultural agreement what this difference is. There was some kind of general agreement that what kind of shape this outward culture can have. Well, that's a debate we don't need to go now, but definitely it was provided by the city, owned by the city, run by the city-owned cable factory company, cooperative oil, as a free space, underdefined free space in that sense. I think it's a good example. It's good. But then, as a some kind of part of the same debate, the whole Kalasatama, not only Suvilahti, but this large still empty peninsula in early 2000s, it was open for temporary ideas. It was called temporary Kalasatama. Many of you know it. And that was a very interesting opening. It was pretty fresh, even globally. It was a new kind of approach. An idea that, okay, let's give it free and undefined so that citizens, different actors, activists, cultural people can actually define what's going to happen and how this space could be used, what kind of innovation can take place. And then the idea was that exactly as Anni was saying, let's not draw the new area, but let's let the social structure form first. Different groups, groupings, even maybe neighborhoods and so on. It was a very nice idea as an idea. Maybe it could be so that social process comes first, and then the actual formal planning comes after. But then the city proved to be a very unreliable actor. The city itself was not knowing what it wants to do, and somebody else, some other department in the city, destroyed this custom temporary. They just kicked these people out, and then they gave the money to some event organizers. And then we have the concerts, which also nice. That's also fine. But there was simply a crack in the policy. The city's policy was not liked by the city itself, and then I think it's a big failure, which is still unwritten. And I still want to raise one other example in Tampere. There is a little bit similar industrial area, Hieneranta, that the city bought unusually. So Tampere normally is not buying the land, but in that case it did. And they want to develop that a little bit similar, opening it to temporary users, opening it to also to companies for short-term and mid-term uses. All kinds of innovations are possible. It is actually quite successful. It is very interesting, and at the moment the best case of this kind of development in Finland. But also they are struggling with what next? What's happening after 4 years? What's happening after 8 years? And when the big developers come in, when we need the bulk bulldozers and the hundreds of millions of euro, how this free temporary phase can in a way survive? What is the influence of that? And this is really difficult. It is a question that is quite central.
Just short comment? Because I'd like to ask.
I can have my comment later, perhaps.
So let's
because I was not sure if it is so short.
Okay, thank you. And this is a suggestion to look on a slightly different side. Like now drawing from the themes first, began by Pedro and Egle in the introduction, and then three of you, that there seems to be these oppositions that there is undefined space, defined space, spaces free from consumption, spaces for consumption, not planned. But then I think that now the solutions that I've heard here, they seem to follow these kind of global models of of experimentation, and this is fine. We need those spaces as well. But there are alternatives to that I would find that the most interesting spaces now in Helsinki culturally are Puhos open air shopping center in Itäkeskus, and especially another open air shopping center in Kontula. And they are commercial spaces. They are spaces for consumption, but they are quite different. I think that now when we're talking about consumption in the opening, that's more like mass consumerism, which is quite different, which means like, uniform shopping things available for shopping and so on and so on. But there can be these like really creative things going on in these commercial spaces as well. And if you look in the history, it's quite often it's the markets, it's the bazaars, it's places like that where lots of creative action takes place. Also political action, things like that. And I'd like to also think of those spaces that they are highly regulated, like the Kontula shopping center. It's owned by the Entrepreneurs Association. They congregate monthly and they regulate the place. But they are they've got different culture of regulating the place. And this is not like the majority is native Finns. It's not native Finns versus immigrants question. That's not the point there. But I see that there's lots of interesting things happening in those spaces. And now somehow lumping the experimental spaces together, we hear about Lapinlahti, Kaapelitehdas, Suvilahti. There's many others. So I think that we need wastelands where not much is happening. We need these sort of experimental places where we could have a pavilion, of course. But then I think there's huge potential in these other kinds of, spaces for consumption, but it's consumption of ideas, it's consumption of, it's exchange. It's much more than, just buying what you can buy wherever. Thank you.
So just, thank you. One contradiction I see in some representations is that you're all in favor for this temporary experimental Christiana. You also were like in your practice as politician, all in favor for squatting and so on, and you as all in favor of renovation, for example. But at the same time, whenever we ask for a bit more boldness in, okay, let's do it, let's go for more experimentation, you go, no, but we know we got to do it for the rules and so on. Please, no comments on these things.
I think that was very good remarks, and I think as a city we should interfere as less as possible. That's like the point, and we should find things to support in our ways, but with very sensitive. I think in Finland we are so used to that everything is like by city or by government. But I think now we have this new culture in Helsinki, very strong culture, subculture, that citizens are self-doing things, like all these ravintola days and so on. And this kind of thing, what is happening now in suburban areas, it's so interesting. I think there must be also other things. And I think cities should interfere as less as possible.
I think it was really a good comment, and although I disagree, I think we used a lot of the contradiction, defined space, undefined space, but I don't think we talked so much about commercial, non-commercial, but I think that you put it right that in cities, actually marketplaces or cities have, like Hema said, that Helsinki has been more like an administrative city, but the most organic, interesting, and older cities, they are marketplaces originally, so definitely you should not take that out of the DNA of a good city, but more to see that how to enable really quite different marketplaces in the city. I think that from certain city administrative point of view, the governance structure of an old-fashioned open marketplace, Ostari, is a nightmare when if things go wrong, and then it's really hard to make it different. But in a functioning one, then it's really interesting because really those who use it as a marketplace do it together and they can support each other. I think with Puhos, there are huge difficulties because you should be able to renovate it, and the cash flow and the money people have bought their shares of Puhos does not probably allow them to renovate it. But I think that there might be still possibilities to actually solve that in a good way. Although I do not believe it will be easy, because it's not in a good shape, and there is not so much financial background for that. But they might succeed in what they are doing now. Or perhaps I let Panu speak and then I continue. No, regarding, I think that, I think I comment what Panu said earlier about what actually defines whether undefined space finds new ways. I think it is less a question of city planning itself, or even city letting some new spaces to be used freely. I think it is more dependent of the strength and space that the civil society altogether has in society. So if everything is pushed to the extreme that no one has space, either mental space or financial space or some other space to think freely, to organize people independently, then there are not people who would be those who are able to find a new undefined space. My husband and a young person called Pontus Purokuru, who earlier this year published a book called Suoraa Toimintaa, where they interviewed and documented the sort of non-parliamentary, non-representative left's history with past 20-30 years in Finland. I think they described quite well that what are the obstacles the sort of more radical civil society bumps into, and in a way many of the obstacles are that people sort of burn themselves in activism, and there are not perhaps ways to pass on in good way the activism, and that is something that I think has the biggest meaning. That will there be new openings and new areas, and of course then the power structures and the officials, they can also contribute, either letting things happen or pushing people to the really brink of either more conflict or then just to the brink of complete exhaustion. And I think that there are alternatives in between that, and I think that the power that the city represents, it shouldn't, its obligation is not necessarily to let everything happen as, for example, in Lapinlahti, I wouldn't, I pushed really hard for those organizations who are now there to let them rent it, but now I wouldn't probably agree exactly what they are wishing the city to do, but I think that it's about giving enough space and alternatives. It always doesn't, from the official side, doesn't need to agree on everything, but you have to be careful not to push too hard so that people wouldn't have the strength to reshape or give the rebirth to the activism. If I could explain myself clearly, I don't know.
A short comment and
Yes, just very short comments and then to go on. Just about this Puhos and Kontula. I like your comment, and you're of course right. Do we need any planning for that? No, planning cannot do anything to have Puhos. But what we should somehow recognize is to some years all authorities should let it be. The building inspection should not go there and say that it's there, it's a little bit leaking. We should let it be. And then we are in the classical changeable situation that city has different type of spaces, also very cheap spaces which are maybe a bit in bad shape, but exactly that allows a difference. And then after some years, a decade, something else happens.
Yes,
First,
thank you.
then I can.
I have been listening with a lot of interest to various positions, and even though they seem uniform and homogenized, it seems that we do agree that over-planning is not a good idea. We might differ in opinions how to do instead of over-planning, which is also good to have different strategies. What I wonder, as we are on the suggestions, is we do have very clear the difference between private space and public, and meaning privately driven or administrated by a private entity or by a public entity. And we seem to agree that a public entity has the function to organize transparency, equidistance, commonality, ethics. Those are not necessarily prerogative of a private. They can be, but not necessarily. And also that in a space that is emerging, when a culture is emerging in a space, it's based mostly on an enormous amount of voluntary work, but not because that work is voluntary, has no value. And this is something that lamentably is very little considered from centralized institutions. I love that in Maria Hospital there is this hub of private enterprises that is organizing a fantastic culture there. And it's great. I go there, I see their events, and just across the street there is Lapinlahti, which is struggling because they are not a hub of enterprises. And what they do is not to recognize the same value as the other hub. But yet, I think that nothing is perfect, and again, difference is interesting, and difference can be nourished, or it can be suppressed, depending on the agenda. And it is natural, I think, to recognize we do have an agenda. Do we want to disclose what is the agenda? And moreover, we are here to discover if urban planning can be a glass room. Can we, normal citizens, interface with urban planning not at the stage where we come with a complaint, but before? And what is that interface? We are craving to discover together with the public and private institutions what is that interface. When there are not economical interests, when it's not a real estate investor, because capital always have a way in, but when it's a different type of entity or a structure, what is the way in? And how is the conversation brought?
Somebody wants to comment?
Maria Hospital, this hub is also run by the city. And but we have normally this problem that when you have an old building, it has a value like in the Excel, and then you fix it and you put that money. So you count those sums together and you have the rent. So we say that we don't subsidize any of those who come in. So, but in this Maria hospital case, it's not in the same way. It's in a different way, and it's not also. Normally we fix them, but Maria Hospital is not fixed. But when it came to this magazine L3, L2, then we have this normal case where you have to pay exactly the rent because it's in our thinking it's democracy. Everybody is paying according to that. So.
No, I wanted to comment a bit the same thing that I do recognize many situations where actually a private owner or privately owned space can be organized more freely because a private owner does not necessarily have same kind of rules, like Henna was saying, that we have rules that, okay, we always take the rent that we have put, from the money that we have put into building. Okay, in Lapinlahti we do not take that rent, but it's much lower. In Maria it has been more organized, and there has been exemptions, but still I think we can recognize actually quite many situations where the publicly owned space, be it an empty space where you plan a whole part of a city, that it's done more rigidly because it's both democratic but also by the same rules than things have been done already earlier. In that, it might not be wise, or it might have some wise features, but it's not completely perhaps wise. But it's just, I think it's a fact that you can recognize that sometimes it's easier to be more flexible with privately owned space.
You should comment? Okay, so I would just like to ask, you mentioned subculture, and then always when I hear that, it's always mentioned the Ravintola, the restaurant type. What else? What else is out there in Helsinki which is like subculture? Because I can see that in Berlin, I can see that in Paris. One thing is famous in Finland, and for the first time, I think this year, the majority of private investors or ownership of land are foreigners. And the reason this is happening is because Finnish people obey rules. They don't mess up. They obey the rules, they pay the rent, and they have the money. So it's great for investors. So the only little things I saw from subculture was the skate park in Suvilahti and the sopa sauna in Kalasatama. Both are going to be destroyed.
Pontula has those electric rap music and electric music festivals.
Please, microphone.
Yeah. There are those little festivals in Pontula, for example. There are rap music and electronic music festival. Well, that kind of, subcultures. Hey, come on. I think subcultures come when they are like.
When you say that subculture comes when it's not overregulated.
Yes. When it's
so are we not overregulated?
Yes, we are now overregulated, and I think those are like vastaista, like opposite. When in England they have very strong subcultures because they have classes, upper class and
you are too.
So We don't get.
Just a very short comment, like ravintola it's not subculture. It's very generic popular culture.
Nowadays, but
It is,
when it was.
but it was regulated then.
No, it's like it's not under anything.
Yeah.
It's very generic. It's about eating and
Yeah, but
trying
it
your
was
restaurants.
rebelling because it didn't.
It still obeyed the rules.
Yes.
So subculture is defined by not obeying the rules.
Yes.
That's I think what you meant, right?
I meant it. The subculture needs a more defined aesthetic and maybe
That's a
also
good point.
Yeah.
also.
Short comments and then we go back there. But
I would agree that Ravintolapäivä is not subculture, although it has been an act when it was established that it broke certain rules and it sort of made space for people to break those rules a bit in a similar way. And I don't even know so much about subcultures. There might be a lot of happening that I would in Helsinki that I would not know. Like perhaps as an example that in Malmin Kartano there has been already many years a squat that you have heard of because some people have been like angry because there have been ads like leaflets advertising sort of lessons for bondage in that squat, but otherwise I think the squat has been there quite freely and done things that even surrounding Malmin Kartano has been agreeing upon. But I think more what is perhaps what is happening in the city, and it's not probably like subculture or it's not even radical. I don't know if it's changing the city so much, but still I think it's significant and it makes the city home to its residents. That there is a lot of activism in different areas, that people do organize voluntary things, people use partly public resources and spaces to do stuff, be it music festivals, be it local festivals, they do organize circulation of stuff and recycling of things, and they do things for the local children, and so a lot of that kind of things I think is happening. I have the feeling that it might not be the time when the sort of the most interesting subcultures are taking place, or then it might be that like the person in my position just does not see it. But there is a lot of still, I think, sort of activism and voluntary work and things that people do that mend the neighborhoods and people's lives together, that is not organized by the public authorities.
Anna, you wish to comment?
Yes, just a very short comment on this subculture. It's really interesting. Your point is right. Without going in any depth of trying to define that, just observation, graffiti clearly subculture. There's no question that for some time ago it was even very soon penalized for a long time in Helsinki, and now there is this flourishing of street.
That's
Flourishing of street art. It's in art museums and it's a big global art phenomenon. But we just wrote a short article with my colleague Dalia Milian, who is here in the audience, about the Pasila, East Pasila, Itä Pasila. There is Helsinki Urban Art. It's organized. There is support from public organizations for that. But still, I think the spatial context is interesting in the sense that there is, I think you can say that it's underdefined to some extent, these odd corners of that space. And in the lack of some regulation, some support from city and some authorities, something quite interesting, I think, is possible. And just to contrast to small town Salo, which is part of the same movement, there's also big interest in murals and street art, urban art. It is simply bought by the city. Now, for example, the big grain silo is quite dear to me. It's completely covered by such a fantastic piece of mural, but it's quite different, I think, in its outcome because of the spatial context.
There is some person.
Yeah. Is this the time for a suggestion or a question?
You can also ask questions. Now you're allowed.
Okay. I have to say I'm very disappointed with this whole discussion because it's very offensive to say that Suvilahti and Sompasauna are subculture and the rest are not. I cannot not think of subcultures in Helsinki today. And I think Anni got it really well when she said, from where you're sitting, you're not able to see what is the subculture. There's like hundreds of ry and yhdistys and this and that. Like, you go on a Saturday, I'm really glad that Puhos and Kontula came up. Like, I can't not think like a Saturday or a Sunday in Puhos or Kontula is more culture than Suvilahti at Flow. Do you know why? Flow is like an organized thing, it's not a subculture anymore. Suvilahti is like the high temple of conventional, commodified white activism. Most of us don't even go there anymore. If this comes as a surprise, then you're very disconnected to urban subculture in Helsinki. A festival with 7 million euro turnover, thousands of youngsters employed without payment, with people of color being, you know what happened.
We're just talking about Flow Festival.
No, but Suvilahti is representative of that kind of thing.
No, absolutely not.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry, let me finish. That's because it is now being commodified. It's for white activists, it's for big organizations. It's not the subculture, because you are not defining subculture. You are defining it as Sompasauna and Suvilahti. Go to the suburbs, go to Lähiöfest, go to Kontula Electric. There's so much happening. Go to Museum of Impossible Forms. That's where the real change is happening in Helsinki. And I think it's also not very sustainable to just say, let not the building inspectors go to Puhos. It sounds like, okay, we let it fall apart and then everybody has to move out. That's laissez-faire urban planning. That's not good either. The city has to be supportive of the people who are not able to do it on their own in this economic system. This money in, money out is not urban planning, that's capitalism. I'm very sorry, but if the city is able to pay money to let Flow Festival run, they should be able, that's why like laws are made by people. We should be able to find money to keep Puhos running. So that's why I'm very disappointed with this whole thing. Thank you.
Panel, do you wish to comment? You wish to comment?
I think I do, even if we perhaps shouldn't go to the complete definition of subculture or not, but intuitively still I think that I do agree with the speaker that if we want to see the subculture or where it's happening, it's not so much Flow, at least it's definitely not, which is an I think a good festival, but it's like it's a company, an enterprise that runs it. I think that I think that the strength of Puhos and perhaps some other things that are like it is partly in the fact that it's a community of entrepreneurs and not like an organization that writes a thing to city that we need support. And I think that with how the city should be able to support that kind of structure is a difficult question. I think there are some ways that probably have to be found out a bit like case by case, and still it's then difficult because for the city there is always a certain pressure for uniformity, because then with the next case someone says that there you acted like this. But I think that anyway, I have the feeling that if we would just do so that okay, we give a certain support, it would also lose some of its strength, since it's an open market type of shopping center. So I think that the city's support should come via certain kind of sort of finding a common process and then finding perhaps the elements of support during that process. And I think that Panu had a point that to a certain extent some things can be supported by not sending the building inspection in. But even that has a limit because spaces have to be, it would be horrible if something happened there and then it would cause losses that I always have a sort of a bad feeling with the fire people and building inspection. But then I'm at the same time happy that usually such buildings do not burn and cause deaths in Helsinki, so that's the positive side of it. But then I think that in those cases, and in many cases, the city's best approach can be something that is quite careful and via negotiation and like completely another example, like those activists who want the fish like salmon or trout to run into small rivers. In Longinoja there have been 20 years of slowly gathering activism of helping trout to reach Longinoja, and they have done things themselves. And at some point, city came in so that city paid for the rocks because you have to modify the river in order for the trout to be able to breed there. So the city came in that the city paid the logistics of the rocks and the actual rocks, but then the activists did all the work. And although it's a different examples, I think that their city was quite careful that it did its part, but it didn't interfere or it didn't go in too much.
Yes. Very short comment on this right comment on subcultures about Puhos. I go back to what I said about recognizing uniqueness and using planning to protect it in some way. But then, what is the way? I don't know. I think this very different example with rocks in a river is very, very interesting. Something quite different, something soft. It needs a new approach, a new policy. It needs some innovation. And what we know as planning today is not very easily helpful in that. But of course, that can be done. I just wanted to say, and I repeat that we also should recognize that it's kind of acceptance that not every place needs to be perfect. Not every place needs to be shiny. Not every place needs to be expensive. And I think that is has been referred many times that it is a real problem exactly in Helsinki and more broadly in Finland that public authorities they need to have that sameness. Every place, and then I think Puhos is a great example. I think it definitely could run 5 years, maybe 10 years with quite little repair, and then exactly that would facilitate the uniqueness and also the cheap threads which make it possible. That was my
question before I go to the gentleman over there. Just wait a second. On the topic of regulation, a study from Tampere University that you are in 2016 showed that Finland is #1 in demolishing buildings in Europe. And this is because it's very difficult to renovate buildings. The regulations are too high, and women because of that. I'm renovating a building, and it's so difficult to renovate.
No.
Please, it's not difficult.
No.
Oh, then please come and fight here.
So I used to work as a chief of this building permissions. Our laws don't have, or used to have, no regulations for old buildings.
our laws were just for new buildings until last January. So about 1 year we have had this kind of regulation.
Fire safety ones.
But we have this only one model. We just make all the things to be new. So we don't know how to prepare them.
I think Panu knows.
We don't, yes, of course there are plenty of people here who know, good architects and so on. Of course there are, but there are too many, also when cities like, and not only cities, owners are like asking, please put this, our house in fix, then they're asking too much. We don't, because, yeah, this is, first I would say that we don't know how to finish things. Our buildings are badly finished. They are not neatly done. But
I think you should check China.
no. Yeah, but I mean that we don't have this understanding that it could be very rough. Things could be like concrete floors with all kind of stains here and then, and no those things there, and still it could look very well. But we think that when we put kipsikartonki levy, such a very cheap things, and we put those orders there, that then it's fine. And we are doing that for the old buildings as well. But for those regulation things, it's not true.
Panu, do you wish to comment?
Well, yeah, it's a long discussion, and I think I try to keep track. But of course, on I think national level, building sector together, architects are part of that, engineers, of course, companies, natural producers. We are committing a mass crime at the moment.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
small. It's a mass crime we are doing to our village. It's really a serious issue. You go to any place, including Helsinki, if you go to smaller towns with less resources, every second school, home at home, every second building, it's crazy. And it's absolutely mass crime, and it's because not because of bad buildings, it's because of bad management and bad engineering and bad or maybe wrong regulation. It's really horrible and appalled of the situation. And I think you are too wrong
yes, we have this. No,
because basically there is a lot, and as I said, we cannot go in detail, but especially energy regulations and air conditioning regulations. Also, in very many cases, fire, people's safety. Can the floor have a crack? No, it has to be reviewed. All these kind of things. If there is something, a small possibility, there is some oil coming from the floor, everything has to be redone, especially if it's for schools and kids. It's coming from really many sources, and we as architects, okay, we are now quite old already, but we have been fighting our whole career against those. And after very systematic fight against the regulations, we can do something more or less sensible. But it's crazy that the system is so hard. And basically it's hard in a way that the results are both expensive and bad. New buildings, the roofs of new buildings, well-inspected buildings collapse. And old buildings are destroyed because of those bad practices, which is, as said, appalling.
We have. No, there was a gentleman over there. I said first. Okay, the microphone.
I've been looking into a lot of different plans of the city and the authorities in the city, and I think that there is too much planning going on and a lot of resources spent on planning and not enough realization or testing these theories. I think that there is a big lack of communication and balance in terms of interdisciplinary perspective of building an urban, more better Helsinki and taking climate change into an account, because I thought this is about climate change in the city, and we haven't talked so much about that. So I think in the planning and the researches I've read, the economic point of view is has a lack of social sustainability part, and I think we don't have enough information, and we don't know what to do because we don't test them. So I believe that Suvilahti could be a place where interdisciplinary we could test and see what kind of plans actually work in order to tackle the issues of the future in terms of growing population in Helsinki, which is also going to affect us economically and on a social level, and of course affect the climate change and how we build the city and what materials do we use and how we move and live in the city. So yeah, I think there's a systematic problems that block the resource efficiency in not only using funds, in creating these plans that are never being executed, and there's also comments and researches about these plans taking so much resources like tax money to be planned and then eventually not being realized in any way. And yeah, and in those resources, when we talk about environment or sustainability, it's always through economic perspective. We need to take the Flow, for example, is a very important platform which is reaching not only a global but local audience that is mainly structured by a certain group of consumers, which is the Generation Z and Millennials and Generation X, which is the future of Helsinki. They're the biggest consumer group. So these companies that are big nowadays used to be subcultures, just like Slush used to be a group of 10 geeks, and so these are very important in different ways. They are economically and socially important things that we cannot divide. So here in the paper there is right brain and left brain, and I feel like I'm from a creative background, but I do work on the kind of commercial part now, and I feel like I'm quite alone in the middle. So we need to find the kultainen keskitie to develop in peace and together, respecting the creative side, but also embracing the economic sustainability.
Thank you. By the way, climate changes, not only climate change. The topic is a bit more broad than just the environment, social environment and environment. Pano, maybe you want to comment? Or Annie should avoid Annie now because you have been talking way too much.
Yes, just thanks for the comment. Very correct. I forgot the name for between the two parts of brain helps. Just a very brief comment on this working together. We did quite a broad study on holistic resource efficiency 2 years ago, and I think the main outcome of that was that to achieve that in urban context, in buildings, in neighborhoods, in transport systems, is to find solutions that are hybrid in the sense that different practices, different organizations, different processes are somehow overlapping, and more than one thing is done at once. This hybrid solution is very, very important for resource efficiency, and that is difficult to achieve in our current situation because of this so-called siloed approach. I mean, there are organizations, there is a separate organization for water, separate organization for electricity, separate organization for transport, and then really create hybrid solutions on important level is not very easy. It should be done. Then other point in the same study, we were trying to unfold this notion of sustainability. I said it was about resource efficiency, but then I think we found some sources that, at least to me, were important. We are used to talk about ecological, economic, and sociocultural dimensions or something of that, and we know that it's very difficult equation and hard to deal with that sensibly. But when you add spatial or urban for example, that we had earlier, how to actually act meaningfully with old environments and buildings. That's a special and architectural dimension. And then institutional, political, and process dimension. So those 5 together, we can create links between them, and that creates a quite holistic approach.
Just a short comment following on that. Why isn't there a repository in Helsinki from construction materials, waste? Like, for example, when you build a building, there's a lot of waste. Why don't you put that waste in a repository that people can reuse it? Why do you have to throw it away? We don't have a repository in Helsinki, a warehouse. Some cities have those things. Why don't we have it? Which plus? Yeah, I'm asking. Oh, the microphone, sorry.
I think that in the action plan for the climate targets that the city board will be approving probably in the 3rd of December, there is a defined target for doing a map for different fields of circular economy, and I think that with that work we will quite heavily work with the construction materials, because it's probably the field where we could achieve the most, since the city is in a situation where we are even sort of internationally compared building really a lot.
Awesome. Please.
Yes, thank you. I've been living past years in Iceland, in Reykjavik, and I moved there after the crash. So there was a heyday from 2000 to 2007, maybe, with the golden SUVs and everything. Then it crashed. But still, when I moved there was still like empty pockets, like I would call them wasteland. There's like buildings and also just wasteland. And for me, I was born and raised in Helsinki, and I moved there, and it was extremely refreshing that in very middle of the city, it might have been very small, for example, next where I live, there was maybe 30 meters to 100 meters, just a little wasteland with a little bit grass, but it was a wasteland. And extremely, for me, I was always telling all the Icelandic people that this is fantastic, I love it, because we don't have this anymore in Helsinki, and everything is too fucking perfect. So my question is that why can't we, even with the planning, actually have mandatory wastelands, really small ones? We are talking about the Lapinlahti, we are talking about the Suvilahti, again, this is how Finnish people do. We have this area, we have to define this area how it's big. Why can't we leave just smaller places, all around the city, like the little places? How about Lapinlahti? Let's use left and right brain. We leave because it's U-shaped. So let's leave the left U-shape undefined, and let's develop the right, for example. This is a free idea that you can use for Lapinlahti. And then let's see after 20 years how it develops, the right and the left of Lapinlahti. It would be really beautiful. And then one thing, because in Finland we have this fantastic, I think it's called Lapset, that make these really fun playgrounds for kids. And they are very safe also, because you have this very, very soft material and everything. And Reykjavik there, I think it's still there because I just moved back to Helsinki. This one in the harbor area, I don't know how it happened, but city just let people to make it their own playground. And it was like fantastic. I mean, it was for sure, it was dangerous, but I mean, kids are like, they manage, and parents, they are like, hey, don't go there and don't do this because you will hurt yourself, or like this. And not like a perfect Lapset playground that for sure, whatever you do, you can't hurt yourself. I think it's okay to hurt yourself sometimes. It might be even good to have a water leak in the laughing lot, because let's just fix it then. It's not so end of the world if it happens. Thanks.
I think good comment on Lapilahti to experiment in sort of 2 ways. Just my comment would be that I think that there are undefined spaces and wasteland, and I think that probably people should just perhaps look a bit broader, because we have been building the city center and it's really planned, like Jätkäsaari will be really planned. But if you go to Tattarissuo, if you go to Herttoniemen yritysalue, you go to suburbs, and suddenly the situation is really different. So I think that probably it's time to look also from another angle, from somewhat different parts of the city than perhaps the city center at the moment. And then it might be that there will be economic collapses, and in the city center the undefined space will be reborn since the financial institutions collapse, but it might be 10 years from now, for example.
But Jätkäsaari is a great example that it's totally planned. There is not a millimeter of wasteland. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I agree. It's really planned.
You plant free zones, which are not free zones.
So, about temporary places, so they are of course changing all the time. They are coming, going, disappearing, but we can support them if they are working models or experimental places. And for example, as you mentioned, all these models, and like in Lapilahti, there is also a good example how to save a historical building in a good way, that you really feel the history, what you talk about it. And of course we can put a price tag and Excel system budgets on everything. So let's do it. Let's put a budget on the time when the city didn't like to use Lapilahti hospital. It was empty and heated, and nobody was allowed to use it, and so on. And also some health and environmental issues. Let's put more price tags, please.
Good comment.
Sorry. Yes.
Before I decide something. No comments?
There's also the aspect of sustainability. If you think about, for example, a car, it's not so very sustainable to ruin all the cars now and buy new and produce new ones. Everything has its lifespan, like the buildings. It's not a good way of sparing something by building a lot of new, because that's also a great use of new resources. We have a great asset. We have buildings through decades and hundreds of years, and we need to take care of those first and find the use and in a modest way keep them up, not leave them neglected for decades, so that it's really hard to take back what we have lost in their condition, and all those regulations that have been changing them through years haven't been so successful in their so to keep them alive, because there's lots of mistakes that have been done because of strict regulations which go up and down, and now we need to sort of regulate the thing and put it back into the basics and sort of rip all that extra out, and I think restoring is a good way of sparing the natural resources, and also it's a really best way of binding that knowledge of cultural history, which we should build on all the time.
suggestion that it's a great plan, of course, but if I was an urban planner, I would have waited a little more time because we have a parcel which is in so much proximity. So I think the kind of development going over there will definitely have an impact in surrounding areas. So Suvilati might economically can fail in front of Pasila. So have anyone taken into consideration what if this experiment fails?
That's a good question. What if Suvilati fails? What if people don't move there?
Yeah.
Yeah. What if people don't? You see already some shops already are going bankrupt, right? So what if it fails?
If we talk about Kalasatama, I would say that it's in a way really possible that the shopping center can fail. What that means then in the end, it means that it would be something that is really different and where the rent levels would be lower. Regarding building housing and that area, I do not see in the foreseeable future that it just seems that there are enough people who would go there and need the flats and pay for them in different ways, be it rental or be it what people buy. And then I think if there happens something that flats are not needed anymore, it wouldn't take long from the whole machinery to just stop building, because quite a big part of that is in that way market oriented, that it wouldn't you wouldn't find players to build flats if there are not people to buy them.
Yeah. Short comments to about that. I think it's I'm saying that those kind of best locations, the green and Kalasatama, some other big central developments in some let's say crisis or downturn scenario would cause problems in more peripheral locations. Housing prices in Tuusula or Kirkkonummi and so forth might start to go down, and even that is even happening to an extent, actually. So Helsinki is using its centrality and may cause trouble in the regional scale. That's somehow one answer. Actually, I wanted to comment on this price tag. It was a very nice comment, actually. Yes, why not? Other thing that I think we have been discussing a little bit in this long evening already, but I would like to raise the notion of new different value regimes. I think Egele, you mentioned that, for example, voluntary work. If we don't count the price tag, but we could count the price tag, but it has value. In some way, we should find new metrics for sustainability that involve those very many different ways how we actually do something important and useful for public good. And this is quite a big task, actually.
I would like to comment on that because most people are not aware, and probably Pano knows, most of the buildings we are building new, they use concrete that decays after 30 years, which means the quality of the structure will decay after 30 years, which means it might have to be demolished. So the mortgage usually lasts longer than the product itself. So it doesn't sound so sustainable, right? Another thing is a comment about empty buildings. There are skyscrapers in Frankfurt that are completely empty, and then you build a new one just beside. This is not because there's not a need, just because the owner or the speculation requires a new building. So why not implement a law? For example, Helsinki could be pioneering this, that you cannot build a new building if in that area X percentage is empty.
I think that even the buildings that were built in the 70s that at that time were estimated to last 40 40 years have lasted a lot longer, and I do believe that the buildings and even how they are planned, they are not. I don't think that no basic structure is planned for 30 years. There might be some parts that we should renovate during 30 years, but not the sort of core structure itself. I see in Helsinki that there are not so much empty space in Helsinki. So I don't see that empty space anywhere in Helsinki would be a reason not to build new housing, for example. So there's more need for people for housing than any amount that we can calculate for empty flats. That there I don't see. It might be a useful regulation perhaps somewhere, but in Helsinki, everything that we build, there are people who use it. And it's a bit different question with the office space, but with housing, it's completely for sure that everything we at the moment build, there are people who need it and who use it.
I just have to tell, I'm a civil engineer. It's true that 30 years is the case. I think I'm the only engineer in the panel.
No, it is not.
It's true.
60 years.
No, sorry?
60 years.
No, it depends which concrete you're using. If it's C30, it's 30 years.
It is
50 to 60
No,
years.
okay.
50 to 60.
We can debate on that later, please. Oh, that question.
Can I say? I'm actually researching playgrounds in Amsterdam, but also like I'm kind of comparing the situation of playgrounds in the 70s to the situation of contemporary playground situation. And in Helsinki, I just observed that there is a very well distributed playgrounds all over the city, but somehow maybe when it comes to experiments, I feel some kind of lack of that production, because I also understood that systematically it's very hard to integrate some experiments in playground conceptions, because they are usually dependent, like someone already mentioned with lobster, then there is very difficult safety regulations which has to do with designing the playgrounds. So usually artists and architects cannot just like propose something simply. So what do you three, each of you, I'm not sure what you think of situation of playgrounds in Helsinki?
Yes, I wanted to comment on playgrounds already earlier. I think it's an issue that we should come up with something new. In the Committee of Urban Environment, where we deal with the playground plans, we have had a lot of debate with the planners, civil servants who plan the playgrounds, and the committee members. And there's, in a way, they probably understand what we are saying, because we are wanting more such playgrounds where you could use the natural shape, the nature basically there, that it would be just a playground, but actually you would have rocks and trees and everything. And then people say that, okay, but we are, if it's an official playground, we as civil servants, we are responsible if something happens. Basically, parents can come and sue us. So there is a legislation. So I think that we have had now this debate. There's one really special in Mustikamar, where the committee then wrote its comment that we want the sort of surrounding to be preserved. And I don't know if this, actually the boundaries of the playground be different, but I think probably we should be now more systematic and come up with some sort of mid-term definition of a playground that is not an official playground, so that the experiments could be used. And I think that it's, like it was mentioned earlier, that for children it's not good if they do not experiment in unsteady and bit dangerous surfaces, because actually then in the end it will affect their ability to balance and react. So we are, if we are building too safely, we are actually doing a misfavor for the children.
About the housing, there's facts that immigration in Helsinki, things from other cities or from other countries, is raising up every year. And yeah, there is needs for housing, for example, in Kalama situation, that you have decided, for example, that it's a good idea to prepare it for housing. Why wouldn't you invest in companies that want to do, for example, low-income housing? Why would you invest in companies that will do high-rise buildings with decaying construction systems that probably not many people can afford to live in there, for example? Like, I would like to know.
Helsinki has a regulated rental housing company, and we do build a share of our total housing every year for that regulated rental housing company, and it's 100% owned by the city. All the time when things are built in Kalasatama, in Jätkäsaari, in Kruunuvuorenranta, and also in northern Pasila, for example, we are building flats for this regulated rental housing company. Helsinki also owns a company that is like the partly ownership, or would know, partial ownership, asumisoikeus. We own that company, and every year part of the buildings that are housing that is being built is built for that housing company. And then we also have part of our own department that does development. So we also do like planning and development of housing. So it's not only private that is being built in Helsinki. Then it's also, there are other players that do regulated rental, like student housing companies. So roughly 1/4 of everything that is being built is regulated rental. Then roughly 30% is somehow regulated and partly city-owned, and some 40+% is free market. So it's distributed like that.
2 more questions and then we wrap it up.
So I would like to go back to sort of a practical aim. It is very interesting to see that there are very different concerns about urban planning and the possibility to influence it. And again, I would like to forward this proposal. How do we make it happen in a participatory manner? Because we have the luck today to have 3 very, very important exponents that can give us answers, or that can in future think about it and make it happen for real. So I am interested in understanding with you if any work group or any system or any device can be thought of where simple citizens can interface not at the level of a complaint, absolutely not, at the level of propositive and informed, most of all informed participation. So I understand that not everybody can study a career in engineering or architecture or urbanism, but we can understand that packaging of informations when they are dealt with clarity. And I appreciated that Deputy Sinemaki at the beginning was addressing the fact that there are some incongruencies in the central institution, but coming from Italy, trust me, this is paradise. And that is the only reason why we think that perfection is almost possible here, and that's why we demand it, because we see it could happen. We could have a participatory, transparent model.
Okay, we'll have just 2 more questions. Please, briefly, if you want to comment, just interrupt me and in the microphone. You want to comment? Or let's make first the question and then comment both, okay?
Yeah, I just have a very quick question. It's just about relating to this idea of social mixing in the city. Is there not like a slight move that this policies of social mixing maybe are becoming a little bit more unquote, like with this recent story about HECA and their decision to match rents to market rates in certain parts of the city? I'm just kind of interested in what your perspective is on that. And then also maybe just about this, like in a lot of other cities around Europe, there's big movements to introduce a rent cap, which is something Helsinki used to have in the 90s, but has kind of got rid of. So I'm just wondering if there's any ideas surrounding that as well.
You wish to comment on both?
Yeah, on both. Yeah. Yeah, I try to be brief because my mother is soon waiting for me with my son. I shouldn't prolong the discussion myself. First, I think the best way to influence, I think, is to make initiatives. That I think that initiatives as well formed, as broad, as sort of interdisciplinary, as innovative as possible, I think it's always the best case to have influence or to get things moving is to form an initiative. Because even if that particular initiative does not go forward as itself, still I think that initiatives are the ones that have the biggest influence from other forms of participation. So that would be my suggestion, and it can be perhaps understood broadly in different fields, basically. And then regarding the second thing, I'm myself against rent cap. I think, for example, in Stockholm, where they have it, it's not functioning, and I think the true key to having enough and sort of fairly affordable housing is to build enough. But having a rent cap, I do not think that it resolves these questions. And regarding Heka's rents, I think there partly has been a misunderstanding that the rents of Heka do not follow the market rent. They are just compared to regional market rents in part of the rent, and they are percentage-wise all as much lower of the market rent in other areas, and also to the rents, there's a bigger influence building is. I wouldn't go, I wouldn't see such worries as some people have seen in that system.
Very last question and then we're done. Please be brief.
Okay, it's not a question, but thank you for going back to the participation, because we have been talking about subcultures and this strategy of free places, which sounds great, somehow, like the planned free spaces, but as a designer and as an architect who works for the city of Helsinki, almost an architect, I'm saying student of fun, but still, because the world really needs big changes, and I think that we are still in a democracy, and the people have to somehow do it. And as a designer or planner, I just wish that all the people would know what they could have and how they could have it. And I'm not sure about how the renewal of land use is, how its future is going to be, but I still hope that education in all levels would be a part of it, because I don't know, the people should also know, because I'm sure if the legislation is going away or never, the people should know how they could also do things outside the free zone borders, you know. So I just, and I don't know what you're doing and in your policy, but I hope that the education from a really low level of the city and how it works should be there.
Thank you. Please give a short answer and a final comment, each one, please.
I'm happy that you are interested in other things than economics and techniques, because those are the main issues when we are talking about cities, how they are developing and so on. So I really hope that you participate public discussion with these other aspects, like social things and all kind of cultural things and heritage and so on and so on and so on. And we really need research which is multidisciplines, yes. We don't have that kind of too much in Finland. Then we have now in Helsinki this osallisuusrahasto, which is some kind of participation of
Participatory budgeting or
and there you can such as different kind of initiatives, and they can be realized in quite, the time lab is quite big, but anyway, it's also good base for discussion. And then, because there are a lot of people who have seen interesting things abroad, please tell examples. We need those. We can also adapt them to this Finnish society, but they are always help us to think in new ways. And I think personally that the future is in suburban areas, and all kind of interesting things will happen there. And also, although I'm for this kind of free spaces and so on, I also believe that we need design, but more like this kind of core design. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think I've already said a lot of things, so at this point I thank you all for a lively discussion that I feel at least has inspired me a lot and brought ideas and angles. Thank you.
Yes, it's easy to join those thanks. Just one sentence about participation and this last part of discussion. I think it's quite important to turn our idea about participation. And as we discussed in the early hour of the debate, there is quite big effort to make sure that people can participate, but they can participate in plan proposals. And I think that should be changed so that there is a, in some sense, shared maybe city, or in some sense broadly shared platform, some kind of one system that helps anybody to propose an idea, as said, to find other actors who can support in making the idea through, and then organize. And in this organization phase, this participatory budgeting could be one tool the city can offer. So I think maybe not 1 promille, or maybe 10% of the city budget could be in that, or maybe 5, I don't know. We are Finland, but a substantial part of the budget should be in this consolidation phase of the process of that initiative in the platform, and then we go to the realization case by case differently. But I think this kind of rethinking participation could be something Helsinki can actually pilot, and I think that would be great.
It's big amount of money.
Well, you know money, I know numbers, but this kind of turning, I think, would be something Helsinki could do, and it would fit the strategy, and I think it would be something the population would support.
Thank you. Final remark. First of all, thank you for coming. Thank you for the 3 hours of endurance, which is unusual. We have snacks here, there's outside. It looks respect. It's unusual to film. I'm going to complain. There's no coffee. What is this? I'm very happy to hear that of this open-minded conversation. 1 year ago, this initiative of ours, Pixelache budget, just started with a pavilion idea, as Angela explained at the beginning, and here we are now with officials from the city discussing about it. I, as an architect and engineer, I've been here for 4 years, I found it a bit difficult to communicate and to participate. Still better than many other countries I've been. But as a person who is not deeply involved or still in the network, as a common citizen, it's not easy. So we have to work on that. We really have to work on that. And also, we see from the general audience the misinformation about simple stuff, like, for example, affordable rental housing. Like, everyone should know about it. So we need to improve the communication and participation for sure. This should be a priority. Again, thank you very much for coming. Keep on track. Yes.
Yes, we keep all your emails and we will send a link with the full article that we wrote. And then we will probably organize different hands-on workshops for architectural democracy. So we will want to organize hands-on workshops to take references. So this will be so all the events that we use for this event, sometimes
If you send me a line, because I get all the emails from everybody, like one email, so I never know. Yes, drop me a line. It doesn't have to be official.
So, you do some kind of from me. Getting larger and smaller. Small team researchers who are working in communities and not exactly. It's more in that case it's approach to education. So basically it's space for students, but also for